So since we're talking a lot about truth, I think it is a wonderful time to bring on Eric Metaxas. I always like talking to Eric. He is a terrific writer and even a decent human being as well, which not many writers are. He's a #1 New York Times bestseller. He's got a new book out called Is Atheism Dead? He's written he wrote a biography of Bonhoeffer. It's just terrific. One of Martin Luther. I believe he was a writer on VeggieTales, if I'm not mistaken, which was still a terrific show. And he has got a national syndicated show called the Eric Metaxas Radio Show. Eric, it is great to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thank you.
Is atheism dead? Let's talk about that further. There are a lot of things I actually want to talk to you about, but is atheism dead? You explain where the title comes from, first of all.
Well, yeah, it's important to explain the title. Obviously, some people remember 1966, a very famous Time magazine cover article asked the question, is God dead? You know, picking up on Nietzsche, God is dead. And the reason I wrote this book and titled it, Is Atheism Dead? Is this is very ironic, and it's hard for people to process because we live in such a secular culture that the evidence for God, which has become ridiculous, overwhelming evidence from science, it's pretty much buried or ignored. And when you look at it, as I have over the years, but it kind of got to a point where I said, this is preposterous. The evidence is open and shut. It's not even, well, there's a lot of evidence. I mean, it's like saying, well, there's a lot of evidence that the earth is not flat. Trust me, it's not flat. No. We don't really need to weigh the evidence at this point. There's enough evidence that we can actually decide. That's how I felt. And I said, I know most people won't believe it when you say it, but when they read the book, they'll get it. They'll see that it has become ridiculous. And I said, the only question to ask today is atheism dead? And of course, people say, well, it's not dead. I'm an atheist. And so, well, you could be a flat earther. If you look at the facts, atheism is no longer tenable. Agnosticism, questions, great. But actual atheism, it strikes me as genuinely untenable at this point. And I wanted to put out this information to show people that's not bluster. Read it and you tell me what you think.
You know, I completely agree with you about this. And I really do think that it made some sense after Newton for people to extrapolate and sort of say, well, I guess everything's going to turn out to be kind of a big machine. But Newton was wrong. Right. I mean, he only got this little picture of things. And it's really out of date. It's an out of date philosophy. So you mentioned, before we get into some of the meat of this, you mentioned that people still don't believe. So when you're saying, is atheism dead, do you feel that there is a movement back to belief? Because we've gone through a long period of decline in church attendance and people saying that they have a religion and all that. Do you feel that that is shifting at all?
I don't think it could help but shift. I think it is shifting for many reasons. But I think, listen, just because somebody doesn't like something doesn't mean that eventually they're going to have to deal with it. You know, whether you're talking about a stolen election or you're talking about vaccines or whatever controversial thing you want to talk about, ultimately the information will come out and people will have to deal with it. I mean, in the book, I write about, for example, Galileo. And I talk about Galileo, the story of Galileo as being kind of the founding myth of secularism and atheism. And it's really ridiculous. But without going into that, the reason I bring up Galileo is that he said to people, hey, listen, don't take my word for it. Look through the telescope yourself. You tell me what you think. And people can hate where the evidence points. They can hate what you're saying. But over time, eventually, the truth will out. To quote Shakespeare, there is no way around it. And I really think that there are conversations being had now, tomorrow, yesterday, in back rooms, scientists talking to other scientists saying that, you know what, this paradigm, it's not working. I don't know who's going to have the guts to raise his hand and say, this doesn't work, whether it's blind Darwinism or whatever it is. There's a lot of that going on. And again, the irony is that the more we know from science, the more it becomes impossible to hold on to this materialist thesis. So people are kicking against the goads. And I think the evidence, when you talk to folks like Stephen Meyer and others I quote in my book, they know when they go to these conferences that people who really know what's going on, they see the handwritings on the wall. The only question really is, how are they going to process it?
Right, right. I mean, when you talk about it, I mean, Stephen Meyer was on the show. Really, he wrote a good book too. But you include a lot of that information here, the scientific, backwash that basically is washing away the logic of this. I remember standing with you in a circle of people at one of these conferences, and somebody kind of going on with being very literal about the Bible, and you turned to him and said, "I don't really care how God made the world. I just know He made it." And so it is. Science is a beautiful thing, and it does reveal all this stuff. But I've never heard a single thing that has made me doubt the truth of the essential Bible. Is that pretty much where you stand? Or yeah.
Well, I find it funny because the narrative, which we've all been, force-fed, the propaganda narrative, whether you want to start with Galileo or you want to go to Darwin or whatever it is, that the God of the gaps, the more we learn from science, the more it pushes God out. Well, that thesis worked for about 20 minutes, and then everything shifted, and then the more information that comes in, it's the opposite. But we got stuck on that narrative. So the first part of the book is about science. The middle part of the book is about biblical archaeology. It's equally preposterous. Every time you turn over a stone in the Middle East, you find more evidence for the Bible as history. And when you get people, whether it's, I forget which Attenborough it is, talking about, well, the Bible, it's a creation myth, and there's all these other creation myths. There is no other plausible creation myth. In other words, if you want to just talk about creation myths, for example, how is it possible that the Bible, that the first chapters of Genesis, ostensibly written 15 centuries before Christ, they get the order of creation right? In other words, just that alone should make you say, wait a minute, that's insane. How does somebody from like the Mycenaean era, from 15 centuries BC, how did they get this order correct? Because all the other creation myths talk about crazy stuff like, a snake swimming in milk and exploding into 1,000 stars. And, that's the level of the other creation myths. This one, albeit poetic, it talks about scientific things. And the more time passes, the more it becomes clear that the Bible is history, that those who want to dismiss it as folktales, they're just being intellectually sloppy. They're just not reading it, or they're not dealing with it seriously. And I think it's just gotten so overwhelming. I said, I've got to put the basics in a book. And of course, there are a few things that have come out recently, but James Tour, who's a nano scientist at Rice University in Houston, he gave me some information. I thought, I've never heard about this. That's crazy. Then I met a guy in Albuquerque who discovered biblical Sodom, an archaeologist, and I thought, this information should be on the cover of every major paper. It's not getting out there, and I need to get this information out there. So there's just lots of stuff in it, and I think it's really compelling. And I think if you're honest, if you want to know what's going on, you're going to find out that a lot of these narratives that we're dealing with for decades and decades, they're obsolete. We've got to be honest with the facts.
Can you talk a little bit more about the archaeology? Because I was talking to an archaeologist who told me that he just didn't believe in the Exodus. He didn't believe that the Jews, escaped, or that there was slavery. And if you read Exodus, it's so clearly, I mean, the one thing I'm really good at is texts. I can tell one kind of text from another. It's so clearly a historical story. Right. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of things they're finding in Israel?
It becomes endless. I mean, I wrote this book, came out, months ago, and already there's stuff that I want to add to it. I've had people on my radio program. If you go to the Eric Metaxas show, we're on Rumble, I interviewed a guy, and this had just come out when my book was just going to print, but they found, it's Scott Stribling, an archaeologist, who found cursed tablets on the top of the mountain where Joshua, it says in scripture clearly that he did this on this mountain, whatever. They found the tablets. This is like, well, this is pretty on the nose. This is exactly it. I had a guy in my program recently, Doug Petrovich, who has done work. This is really astonishing. And I am going to write another book, which is kind of a follow-up where I get into this stuff. But he has found Egyptian hieroglyphics that clearly are the antecedents to Hebrew alphabetic letters. In other words, he has found a link. I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that. So you have all these theological liberals who say, oh, there's no connection between Egypt and there's no evidence that the Jews were in Egypt. But this guy has found tons and tons of evidence. But the most interesting to me is that he shows how the Hebrew alphabet derives directly from the Egyptians. So when you've got Joseph in Egypt and Manasseh and whatever, that they would have been at the top level of society at trying to figure out. Anyway, everywhere you look, you find stuff like this. And so some of it is in my book. More of it is coming out. And the funny thing, Andrew, is that, look, this is real. This is true. So we're only going to find more evidence. The evidence continues to come out. And it's an exciting time because as our faith is challenged, I think more and more evidence comes out where you say, listen, we didn't have this evidence 30 years ago, 50 years ago, but it has now become, disturbing for somebody who's stuck on a secular narrative.
Yeah. Can you talk, one of the things that this great advantage you have is you're very articulate, you're a Yaley, you come across as a Yaley, you can tell that you're not, the way they try to portray religious people as small-minded and bigoted. And one of the tricks I've always noticed that the press plays is you come on and you're talking about, say this, or theology, philosophical ideas and all this, and they immediately say to you, what do you think about gay people? Or, what do you think, why don't you let, do you know that when a woman needs an abortion, this kind, and they immediately go to something that's controversial, which you're not even talking about, which maybe is another theological discussion.
Right.
How do you deal with the press when you're facing off with them?
I don't know how much I deal with the press. And one thing that I have learned over time is you don't waste your time talking to people who aren't actually interested in the truth. In other words, if somebody wants to play a gotcha game, play it with some other sucker, because I'm not going to waste my time, God's time, your time. If people are interested in the truth, we can have a conversation. But there are plenty of people that are that's the last thing they're interested in. They have a narrative, they have an idea, and they just want to make you look bad or whatever. But I tend simply to avoid those people because, frankly, I don't respect them. How can I respect you and take you seriously if you're not really willing to dig into stuff? We should be interested in what is true. Let's reason together. Let's try to figure out what is true. And if I've missed something, let me know. Or if you don't like something I say, let me know. But let's at least try to be honest. But it fascinates me how people pretty quickly reveal themselves not to actually be interested in what is true. They're just annoyed that you might believe it, so they're trying to make you look bad. And so I do my best to avoid those people. Yeah,
that's smart. It is. We're talking to Eric Metaxas about the book Is Atheism Dead? Can you talk a little? I don't want you to rehearse your entire life or anything like that, but can you talk a little bit about how you lost your faith and found it?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I think, I don't know if I ever lost my faith. Here's the way I would put it. I was raised in this house. This is where I am. I'm in Connecticut, Danbury, Connecticut. And like a lot of people, my mom came from Germany. My dad came from Greece. They met in an English class in New York City, working class European immigrants, thrilled to be in America. So I was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church. And for me, religion, faith, whatever it was mostly an ethnic identity, right? I realized I didn't know what I believed when I went to Yale University, because there suddenly anybody who has any kind of a biblical narrative, you're going to be challenged. Everybody knows those people are crazy. That's flyover country. We're the cultural elites. We're secular, whatever. So I never really renounced what little faith I had, but I kind of drifted. And if you drift and you're not sure what you believe, if you imbibe the cultural attitudes, which I didn't become a strident atheist, but I was sure that I had no clue what's what. And it wasn't until I'd been out of Yale, it was like about 4 years, I was really lost. I was so lost that I moved back in with my parents in this house, and if your parents are working class European immigrants, they're going to look at you like, why are you here again? We didn't have food when we were growing up. We didn't get to go to college. You went to Yale. We put you through Yale, working menial jobs. So why are you here, like looking for the meaning of life? And my friends' parents would be like, "Oh, Eric's trying to find himself," and my parents would be like, "Yeah, Eric should find himself a job. Like that's the goal. Find a job and move out." So I really went through this. Everybody I was hanging out with mocked the idea of any kind of serious faith, much less, political conservatism, whatever. I was in that milieu. That was just the world that I was in. But when I came back to this house in Connecticut and lived with my parents, I was away from my friends. I had time to think, and I was miserable. And in my misery, I opened just a tiniest crack to the idea of faith, but not much. But if you suffer, it focuses you. And there was a guy who came into my life. I had a horrible job. What kind of a job do you get with a Yale degree, Eric? Well, I'll tell you what I got. I got a job as a proofreader at Union Carbide in Danbury, Connecticut, which is about as hellish as anything you could imagine. As the editor of the Yale Humor magazine, I'm writing short stories and poems. And, I have a job now in corporate culture reading chemical manuals. It was so miserable. And in the middle of this hell comes a graphic designer who was a man of faith. And every now and again, he'd share a little bit with me. And I was in enough pain to be a little bit interested, but I was inoculated against these are crazy people. They believe the Bible. I don't want to. Well, this went on for months and months. And then one night around my 25th birthday, I had a dream. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was utterly and undeniably miraculous. And in the dream, I won't tell it because it's a little complicated, but people go to my website. There's a video where I tell the story, ericmetaxas.com. But Jesus made himself known to me in the dream in a way that left zero room for doubt. It's like, now, game over. Suck on that, Eric. You don't like it. Your friends are gonna throw you under the bus. Your life is ruined. But now have fun. So the next day, knew that what I wasn't even sure it was possible to know. In other words, I kind of thought, well, maybe God exists, but no one with a brain would say, I know that he exists, or I know the Bible is true. Well, the next day I knew. And I thought, well, now I'm going to have to read some books and try to make sense of what I know, because I don't know what I'm going to tell all my Yale friends and my Manhattan friends and my literary friends. They're going to think I'm nuts. And many of them did. But you know what? There's not much you can do about that. And I think it takes time, but eventually you make peace with the fact that truth is truth. I know what I know. If there's some people who have a problem with that, it really is their problem. And I want to be loving and be there if they have questions, but I cannot lead my life worried about what they think, because there's this character named God who created heaven and earth. I'm concerned with what he thinks. That's kind of my priority.
A great story, illustrates everything we've been talking about on the show about the emperor's. Atheism is the emperor's new clothes. Eric Metaxas, the book is Atheism Dead? It's great to see you. Come back when the new book comes out, and hopefully maybe we'll meet up in New York before that.
I would love it. Thank you, my friend.
All right, great seeing you.